I think you are probably all wondering how I ended up as Consul General. Um, I'm wondering that too. It shows you that it doesn't matter where you start. I mean, you know where you start, but you don't know where you end. At this point in my life, I think the sky's the future, so let's see what comes up. Um, Good evening. I would like to first thank Director General Mark Dunfried, Dr. Colette Mazzucchelli, the board members of the Academy of Cultural Diplomacy and NYU for their kind invitation to participate in their International Symposium of Cultural Diplomacy in the UN. Today, I hope to be able to convey the warmth, flavor, and friendliness of Panama. And of course, I hope that someday each and every one of you will visit us to discover what every guest we've had so far has discovered themselves. Being at the center of the Americas has allowed us to enchant the world since the beginning of our history. From the arrival of Columbus to Panama in 1502, our country, the place where the two oceans meet, has been deemed as one of the most important places for the development and advancement of peoples in the America. Founded in September 1510, Santa Maria la Antigua del Darién was the first permanent European settlement in the Americas mainland, and in August of 1513, a mission was erected in the same place, with Fray Juan de Quevedo as the first Catholic bishop in the continental Americas. In September 1513, Vasco Núñez de Balboa was the first Spanish conqueror to highlight the unparalleled geographic location of Panama when he discovered an ocean to the south of the isthmus, which he named El Mar del Sur, which is the South Sea. And Hernán Cortés, in the 1530s, wrote a letter to King Charles V, where he expressed that the privileged geography of Panama would clearly allow them to build an interoceanic passage. Being at the heart of the Americas has allowed us to play an important role in history. Our roads were the epicenters of trade and commerce between the New World and Europe, with two important portage routes called El Camino Real, which roughly translates to the Royal Way, and El Camino de Cruces, which is the Road of Crosses, linking the Pacific and the Atlantic. They witnessed the gold and silver fever, and to this day, the world's first transcontinental railroad, the Panama Railway, continues to bring people and products together. The construction of this project brought in one of the largest flows of immigration that our country had ever seen, with the workers from the United States, Europe, Colombia, China, and a lot of the Caribbean islands. Being at the crossroads of America has made us develop into an open culture that embraces new people and celebrates diversity, and also has naturally made us neutral and a peaceful country. The country's main religion is Catholicism, but you can see practicants of many other religions present, such as Jewish, Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims. I remember one person once telling me that it was the only place in Latin America that they had seen a Muslim practicant in a whole outfit from their religion. You don't see that very often in Latin America. Today, we continue to unite the world. Panama is a great place to discover the diversity that Latin American region offers. A small country with a big heart at the heart of the world. For those of you who love sports, we're the country of Mariano Rivera, Rod Carew. If you like boxing, Roberto Mano de Piedra Duran. He actually had a movie come out not too long ago called Hands of Stone. For those of you who enjoy the music scene, we have world-class composers such as Omar Alfano, jazz virtuoso Danilo Perez, artist, musician, actor, and actually lives in New York, Ruben Blades. And for those of you who are in the younger crowd and enjoy Despacito, just so that you know, it was co-written by a Panamanian author called Erika Ender. We are home to the first Frank Gehry architectural piece in Latin America. We're also home of some of the world's most luxurious hotels, top destinations for travel and leisure, backpacking, Latin America's biggest shopping center, and one of on other sites that diversify an array of travelers. With over 1,500 coast miles, Panama's beaches and the islands are one of the most visited in the world. From more than 500 Virgin Islands in the San Blas area to the gorgeous beaches with great parties in Bocas del Toro, which some of you probably heard of, you will definitely find yourself in paradise. From El Casco Antiguo, where history lives in architecture, to Los Santos, where a national costume called La Pollera was created, paired with beautiful tropical weather and an access to both Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean, we have an offer that is very hard to pass on. The Azuero Peninsula, for instance, is the epicenter of tradition. Its history dating back to pre-Columbian indigenous groups and the remarkably well-preserved Spanish culture reflected in festivals and architecture around the area make it the heartland of our history. We have beaches, jungles, mountains, reachable within minutes of our booming metropolis, Panama City. You can wake up at the economic and financial center of Latin America and have a seaside dinner at one of our islands by nighttime. We have built a country on the basis of union, and our culture, cuisine, and our tourism destinations are reflective of that. Connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific, our hub of the Americas in Panama is one of 3 places in the world that moves more passengers than people actually live in the country per year. We're also home to more than 100 multinational companies that have chosen Panama to set the regional headquarters. And our Panamanian airline, Copa Airlines, connects the region by serving 75 destinations in 31 countries in North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. Panama is the most interconnected country in the hemisphere, with a railroad that allows for transshipment of cargo in the Americas, and a newly expanded canal that has almost tripled its capacity and gives access to a market of 3.5 billion people via 1,700 ports in 160 countries through 144 maritime routes. That's a lot of numbers in just one sentence, but it makes sense if you let it sink in. This is our global connectivity hub, a safe logistics platform and a sound financial system that make Panama a key destination for business and investment. The country also hosts 2 large festivals. The International Jazz Fest, which showcases musicians from all over the world. It was a brainchild of Danilo Perez. And it has clinics and learning opportunities from the biggest names in the business, small venue presentations, and a final large-scale concert. And it has quickly become one of the most popular cultural events in Latin America. We have people from all over the continent just flying in and enjoying from this music. The International Film Festival, created because Panamanians share an immense cultural passion for cinema, and is always open to exchange with all nations in the world, screen over 60 films from 26 different countries in our last event that was in 2015. Actually, no, it was this year, 2016. One of our latest recognitions has been received from the Pope himself, with the decision of choosing Panama as a host for the 2019 World Youth Day. We are expecting over 200,000 people for the Pope's visit, and we could not be more excited about it. We're currently in the development of 2 important projects. The first one, a UN building to house all UN-related organizations currently based in Panama, which will facilitate communication, cooperation, and increase the efficacy of the efforts of their programs. The second is the Humanitarian Response Hub, which will allow for quick deployment of resources in the case of a major catastrophe. And I think that goes without saying with the previous weeks and days, that it's just something that has to be done. Taking advantage of Panama's convenient geographical location, since we're located within 6 hours of any major city in the Americas. Panama's also very lucky with the geographical position it has because we are not directly hit by hurricanes, thanks to our very tiny footprint. And we have a very stable tectonic plate system, which gives us very, very little seismic movement. Our country is a unique destination, not only for tourists and retirees, but for adventure seekers, scientists, storytellers, artists, musicians, and citizens of the world that have made Panama their home. This ability to bring people and experiences together is unique in the world. Please join us and see it for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
So please, questions or comments for the Consul General about the presentation or Panama in general? This is our chance to do some culture diplomacy.
Just about Erica Enders. She was, of course, at the Social Goods Summit so we had the great pleasure of hearing her sing and seeing the warmth indeed and the passion of her commitment both to social good and human rights. So that was a pleasure.
She's an amazing person overall. I mean, it's very enriching when you see an artist that is so willing to share.
Indeed. Yes.
And so willing to work for things that are right. And she's very active when it comes to getting the youth involved in music. And
Yes.
I think young people need different venues to express themselves.
Yes.
And that goes hand in hand with something I always say is, and I think it's tacit to say it, but I think our countries should invest more in our children's education rather than arguing.
Yeah.
I think the only way for us to move forward is to bring in tolerance to the table, which I think over the years it has been stretching thin and getting lost. And then people like Erika try to teach this to kids, and I think that's why she's so valuable.
Indeed, and I think that her resonance among the youth, as well as her commitment to artistry and to cultural diplomacy, is evident. So I was very grateful to have the opportunity to see her perform, and it was memorable, I have to say, very memorable.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Alejandro, I have a question. How important is cultural diplomacy to the foreign policy of a country like Panama? My initial instinct would say really important. You know, culturally, you have so much to offer. But are there separate institutions doing cultural diplomacy? Is that the job of the embassy? Or how relevant or impactful do you think cultural diplomacy is and can be when it comes to the foreign policy of Panama?
Well, our president, you probably don't know this, but he was our former Minister of Foreign Affairs in the previous administration. So he took it very to heart, where he understands that the only way to solve conflicts is by trying through resolution. He's been very adamant to getting people, the key important people, sit down and try to consider their differences and solve their issues. I know he was part of the bridge between the United States and Cuba when they did the summit of the presidents. It was the first time that a Cuban and an American president had actually sat down in God knows how many years. He also tried to get the Pope involved with the whole situation in Venezuela right now. I mean, in the end, countries need to be able to solve their issues themselves. And sometimes they need to be helped. I think going with your question, I think cultural diplomacy is among the most important things, and I think the leadership from our president, the example set by our Foreign Affairs Ministry, and I think that permeates to all of us that are in foreign service. And the message is always that of resolution. And Panama has always been in a situation where, like I said in my words, we've been neutral, and we've always tried to be an artifice to help when it comes to mediation and conflict resolution.
Okay. And maybe as a follow-up question for you and also for anyone, I'd be curious to get other reactions too. Where do you see the job of the government of Panama when it comes to cultural diplomacy? And I'll give you 3 examples. The USA, we don't even have a Ministry of Culture. In the sense, the idea in the USA, that's the job of the private sector. If you want to sell your Hollywood movies, go for it. That's not the job of the government. And we could debate if that's a helpful or not policy. During the Cold War, the USA was very active. We had America House, and really there was a lot of cultural diplomacy. I would say I think the Americans made a mistake at the end of the Cold War and said, okay, mission accomplished. We won the Cold War, no more need. They cut the cultural diplomacy. Even under the Obama administration, even though that wasn't his will, Fulbright was also cut, I think, by 30%. And of course, Donald Trump has even bigger plans to continue cutting. So that would be one example. Another example would be France, which is the complete opposite. France basically says culture is super important. It's so important, we've got to invest money to support culture in terms of actually financing, whether it's film industry, music industry, etc. And the French government sees it as their responsibility to block the input or the incoming culture, where they have quotas on the radio, for example, limiting the amount of music that can be played in languages other than French. So the government really has an opposite approach in France, where this is culture and we need to protect it, we need to support it, and really proactively the French government pays money to bring French culture abroad. In Berlin, there's a big institution there called the Maison de France, where they have a French cinema in the building, they have a French brasserie, they have Institut Français, Alliance Française, French exhibitions. Any way they can, the French government is paying to actually bring French culture abroad, very different from the American approach. Germany is a little bit in the middle. Germany actually has a much more humble approach since the Second World War. They realized they couldn't go around and tell everyone how great Germany was, so it's much more about exchange, much more of a two-way street. But in terms of magnitude, the German government is spending more on cultural diplomacy than political and economic diplomacy. Things like the German Academic Exchange Service, Goethe Institute, Deutsche Welle. So this, I was saying, is background also for some of the newcomers who are here from NYU today, who weren't here for earlier on in the conference. But how does Panama see this? Because you were telling me before how Panama really sees its foreign policy in many ways multilateral. You are part of a group, you are a team player. So to come to the simple question again, what role does the Panama government have with cultural diplomacy, and how would you compare that or contrast it to the three examples I gave?
I think all three examples you gave me are valid to paint a picture about how important culture is in different countries. Having said that, the three countries you mentioned are first world countries. They have a budget that is able to withstand the decision about what you do with your culture and how you decide whether you want it imported, exported, or maintained. Panama situation is a little bit different. We do have an institute called Instituto Nacional de Cultura, which is the National Culture Institute, and is the one that its sole purpose is to promote our own culture internally as well as externally. Obviously, we don't have the reach that other countries do have, but and I'm going to make a reference right now. Panama is a very different animal, and I think I was commenting this with someone yesterday. Panama has a couple of different facets, and we always say that even though we're one country, we have a lot of different. We have a diverse background, and I always state the fact that geographically, Panama belongs to Central America. Historically, Panama belongs to South America, which, I mean, as some of you may know, we were part of Colombia at some point. But culturally, we're very Caribbean. So we don't really fall in the same format as many other cultures from Latin America, Central America, or South America. We have a very unique culture, and even though we do have an National Institute of Culture, I think any Panamanian you meet is an ambassador for culture. You're not going to find many people that are more proud to be Panamanians and proud of their culture and their music and their food, and they are all so very welcoming, which is part of our they're very happy, they're very they're fun, they're welcoming, they're warm, they like to mingle, and a good example of this is, being in New York. Panama has the largest population of Panamanians outside of Panama is in New York.
Yes.
It's hard to come to an actual number, but from information that I've been able to gather, we have over 100,000 Panamanians within the tri-state area and the northeast of the U.S., which is the jurisdiction of my consulate, but about 80,000 live in Brooklyn. Now, you have first-generation Panamanians, and then you have the second and third generation, which are, the sons of the people that live here, and then there's their people. So you have the grandkids that barely speak any Spanish, but you talk to them, and they talk to you about Colón, and they talk to you about the places of where their parents or grandparents were from, and they'll talk to you about the music. And then Panama has a large Independence Parade in Brooklyn, which all of you are welcome to come. And I was saying to someone how surreal it was to hear Típico, which is our, I guess, national music sound, which is a bit of a evolution of folklore music, in the middle of Brooklyn. And it was just being blasted through these huge speakers, and I was telling my wife, who's on the audience, that it's quite surreal to live this, to hear your music, that's something that you grew up with, in the middle of Brooklyn. And that's why I was going back to your point. I think everybody is a cultural ambassador, and it depends on how you express yourself and how you take your message to people, and I think that opens receptiveness and tolerance as well. I don't know if I've extended my...
Well, no, that speaks well to Brooklyn, because, of course, the motto is home to everyone from everywhere.
Right.
And we're very proud, of course, of the fact that we have this rich diversity. So that Panama would be part of that diversity for us is a tremendous, tremendous asset.
That's correct.
Whereabouts in Brooklyn would you say the population is spread all over, or different?
They're spread all over, but I know the parade is on Franklin Avenue.
Okay.
But it's in that area, Flatbush, Franklin. There's a tiny Panamanian fusion Caribbean cuisine restaurant called Kelso's. I'm not getting paid for doing the commercial, by the way. It's just that it's hard to find Panamanian food outside of Panama in New York. So.
No, Alejandro, I think the points you just made there are very interesting from a cultural diplomacy point of view. So let me just add something to that, especially for the participants of the conference and the students. There's a myth in cultural diplomacy that you referred to a little bit as well. Cultural diplomacy, it's for the big guys, the big players, the first world countries. They've got the money, they've got the power, they're the ones who can really do this. And I've heard many excuses from smaller countries, not from you, but for example, Slovenia, even Hungary, etc., saying, Mark, or smaller African countries, Burundi, Malawi, Rwanda, etc., Mark, we don't have the funds for this. Mark, we're new. We're Eastern European countries. We've only been, 20 years. We have to give us a chance. We had one power over us. Now we have this other power. And for me, there's no excuses. I think every country can do cultural diplomacy. Every country has a culture. Every country has an identity. It doesn't matter how big, how small, how much money, etc. And the points you were making there, I just want to underline, I think the key thing is take what some may see as a weakness and use it as a strength. The fact that you're small, I remember we had a conversation a few weeks ago. We were talking about where we should hold your speech. And I said, so, what is the embassy like? Or the consulate general? And they said, Mark, it's too small, we don't have it. And that's an asset, not a liability.
Right.
That forces you to come here to NYU. And these students probably would not have heard you, if we had done it in a Panama space. Think of the U.S. embassies around the world. They're like fortresses with walls and this and that. Come on, how are you going to do any public outreach there? So I think all of the things that you were actually referring to as limitations or liabilities, I think could actually be seen as assets and are assets. And so therefore, I'm mentioning that for everyone here, because I really think cultural diplomacy is for everyone. And the other point I want to underline that you made, it's for the people. What better way to get to know a country than to get to know 1,000 or 80,000 of its countrymen? Much better than a government who very often doesn't speak on behalf of the people. And I think in our own country, the USA, we're very sensitive to this issue as well. Just because someone maybe is elected as in a certain office in Washington, D.C., are they really serving the people? Are they really representing the people? And that's why, without being partisan or this and that, just to make the point that I think it really is important, this idea of citizen-to-citizen diplomacy is key for every country. And I think that should be really the goal of cultural diplomacy. To quote one of my college classmates, actually at Columbia University, the competitor of NYU, even though I'm a big fan of NYU, Lauryn Hill, many of you may know, a famous singer from the Fugees, etc. While she was still at Columbia, she started a nonprofit organization called the Refugee Project. And I always refer to her because Lauren's mission, or the way she saw the world, very much has impacted the way I see cultural diplomacy. She would always say, Mark, the main difference between human beings in the world is not race or ethnicity or gender or nationality or religion. It's access. Some people in the world have access to what they want and what they need. Some don't have access. And that's maybe access to education, access to peace, access to human rights, many things. That was the filter that she used to look at sort of the challenges in the world, and her particular focus there was refugees. I think it's the same challenge for cultural diplomacy. It's not a matter of saying Panama is great, or USA is great, or Hungary is great, but we have to facilitate access. Let's give opportunities for individuals like you did last night to discover Panama. Let's give individuals opportunities to get to know Panamanians. And that's where I think academic exchange, cultural diplomacy as a whole can be really helpful.
Well, I
So-
mean, I'm gonna add on to what you're saying, and I agree with you that there's no excuse for not doing cultural diplomacy. And I think that presents the opportunity of being creative about how you
Exactly.
how do you export your your culture. Um, Last night's event cost money, but there are other ways to do it. I mean, being here, this is my third year. I'm lucky enough to have met, I think, important people in different spheres of what New York is. I have a very good relationship with Eric Adams, which is the Brooklyn Borough president. And they're very open to always showcase their constituents' culture. So all they ask is for you to take a folkloric group to do a presentation, and they'll have the venue, and they'll have the people that they invite, and they'll bring in, and you just have a free venue to show and there are so many different venues like that here in New York. I mean, I feel like New York, if anything, is one of those places where it's hungry for culture. And it has a, you have how many universities you have here, and you have students, and you have the creative side of things, and it just has that je ne sais quoi that has people gravitate towards New York.
Well, the nice thing is you have the private universities, very old, like Columbia,
Mhm.
the newcomers, more NYU.
Mhm, mhm.
You have the whole city university system, then you
Yeah,
have the New
CUNY
York
and
State.
you have-
You have
yeah,
CUNY
right.
and then you have SUNY. So Stony Brook out
Mhm.
on Long Island is rapidly becoming the largest of the SUNY campuses. And I was out there recently for a news literacy workshop. It was impressive. I mean, you can really see the strength of education in the state, and then that's mirrored in the city and right down to the local areas.
Right.
And the fact that those local areas bring into them the diversity of which you speak, I think speaks to the vibrancy of the state
Mhm.
and the state and the nation. So I think we are trying to reach out from the local beyond. And I'm delighted to hear that you're pleased with the relationships you're cultivating, and that for Panama, there's a lot to be said for its presence here and the way in which that can speak to cultural diplomacy. Because
Right.
it's people to people. We interact, we learn about each other. We try to see how the other thinks and feels. So I think it's a very good approach, shall we say, to learning about the other
Mhm.
and having a dialogue.
I think one of the things that people always ask me is, how do you feel in New York? And honestly, and I'm not trying to sound pompous, but I feel because Panama's background on the melting pot that it is, and how many cultures we've had, and how everybody coexists. As I mentioned, you have Muslims, you have Jewish, you have any religion that you can think of, and they have the freedom to express their beliefs, and I remember there's in the northern side of Panama, it's called Colón, and you have the Colón Free Zone, which is a tax-free place where you have no sales tax or introductory tax, because it's basically just a bridge between large-scale producers like China to get their products, and then you have people from South America or Central America that go and buy. So it's like they're buying it from China, but they don't have to make the trip.
Right.
And I have a Jewish friend that was telling me how he was laughing at himself the other day, because he sees all these things in the world, and how the Arab world and the Jewish world, and they're all having so many issues.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me, he's like, who I had a coffee with this morning? I'm like, no. He's like, well, the business across from me is owned by an Arab family. And I'm like, okay. He's like, yeah, I was having a coffee with him. And I think Panama is probably one of the few places in the world where this actually happens, and there's nothing. The only competition we have and the only war we have is a prize war.
Right.
But other than that, it's just everything's fine. So, but I've been lucky enough to find my place at home in New York. New York is what you make of it in the end.
Yes.
If you are easily deterred by traffic, which we have plenty of in Panama, you're fine. If you don't like the cold, then you have a problem. I think my thermostat was broken from birth, so I don't have an issue with the cold. And it's just being able to see the people. You have so many, it's just the size of the melting pot. You walk down the street and you see an aspiring musician, you see a bohemian person, you see the tourist that, and you have the different scales of tourists. You have the high-end tourists, you have the big group tourists, you have the young tourists. So it's just refreshing to see so many people in one place.
Yeah. I mean, this would have been very interesting this morning, given the discussion that we had opening at the Secretariat about religious minorities.
Yep.
And some of the questions that were raised there. The encounters, I think, that Consul General was talking about speak well to the need to encourage that in our areas.
Definitely, definitely. Is there a final comment or question? No, we good? Yes, okay. A number of them, actually. Okay. So, maybe ladies first, and then, okay.
My name is Amanda Shatsko. I'm from Vancouver, Canada, and I've actually been privileged to go down to Panama and enjoy some time down there. We were talking about, you briefly mentioned about exporting the culture of Panama to here, but I think what is great about Panama is there's actually a lot of Canadians that go down to Panama. They're also known as snowbirds, so we get a lot of snow. They like to travel down.
I think there are a lot of snowbirds that just stayed there.
Yeah, they do stay there too.
They never came back to Canada.
But I also found, I was interested with my time down there, is how welcoming all the cultures are. I was able to spend some time in some of the indigenous communities and learn the cultural dances and the foods, and I think it's very, the hospitality there is very nice. So I just wanted to
Thank you. And to add to your point, yes, as I mentioned, we have a lot of retirees that come to Panama. Healthcare is really cheap. Just as an example, my oldest son had to go through a procedure, and we tried to find out how much it was going to be here total, and with the insurance, it was going to be like $6,000. So we flew down to Panama for, I think it was Christmas, and we went to a top-notch plastic surgeon that did the whole thing for $400 without insurance. We just walked in, we said, we want this removed, and he said, all right, fine. Did the operation, and he doesn't even have a scar. So we have great healthcare, and that's one of those things that people really like about Panama. And I think I didn't mention it, but Panama probably has one of the largest diverse group of indigenous populations. I think we have like 5 or 6 different indigenous groups, and they're located in different parts of the countries. And it's beautiful to see how, depending on where they live, they dress differently, and the colors they use are differently, and even their appearance is different.
Right.
So that's something that you don't really find in many countries. And about the snowbirds, I think once you get to experience Panama for the first time, it's hard not to go back. And we found that Panama's very lucky when it comes to getting the word out, because as we mentioned before, it's not like Panama has a large budget to spend on exporting our image, but our biggest the biggest way that we have that people spread the word is people that actually went, and whenever they go back to wherever they're from, the first thing they want to do is get someone to do the same thing they did, because they had such an amazing time that they just want someone to experience it. So thank you for sharing the fact that you went in.
Another hand in the corner, please. You're next, yeah.
Hi, I'm Brandon Ward. I'm executive master's candidate in NYU and studying professor's conflict resolution class. I was interested to know, Your Excellency, if your job personally of that, of the government in general, promoting culture of Panama, got a lot more difficult after the negative press and the so-called Panama.
I think it's a valid question. I think what the Panama Papers ended up being was, first off, it was a fairly unfair development of events. I think it was a conversation that needed to be had, but I feel like it was unfair that a whole country was tarnished just because someone made some findings. One of our lawyers back home actually made a piece, an opinion piece about the whole situation, and I thought he brought in a valid point. You know, when you talk to the people that did the findings, they commented on how, you know, this needed to happen and there needed to be justice. And then the question he asks was, well, if this was supposed to be something heroic from your end, why is it that you ended up selling a percentage to Uruguay and a percentage to different countries and you ended up making a profit out of it? And the next question that he asks was, well, I would like to know where they were paid and if they actually paid taxes on what they received. I thought it was a bit of an ironic situation. But going back to what you say, I used to have an uncle, I had an uncle, that used to say that any publicity is good publicity. In the end, it's just what you make of it and how you manage the situation. Panama has proven in more than one occasion that we are in compliance with the OCDE, with Gafi, and I think it's interesting how the things that we were being chastised on are now being used by other countries to promote their tax reforms and things like that. So I don't think it really hurt us. I think it just put us out there, and I think our country leaders have actually used this in a positive way.
Excellent.
I don't know if I answered. Okay.
We're a little bit over time. Is there
Take
another
another
follow-up?
question?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I'm Sejuni. I'm from Seoul, Korea. I'm the second-year student at NIU. Speaking of a limited budget on cultural diplomacy, I'm wondering how you see the potential of social media to do cultural diplomacy, and plus, I'm wondering how the government of Panama is utilizing the social media as a platform for cultural diplomacy.
Okay. I think social media is a great tool. But if you think about the culture within the government, it's a little bit, sometimes it's backward thinking. So you have to change the culture within the ministries and within the government to be able to prepare them to successfully be able to manage cultural social media. I feel like it's an excellent tool, and like I was telling Amy, the people that have gone are people that write pieces for the Times and pieces for Travel and Leisure magazine, and we didn't pay them. They just did it, and it all of a sudden just spreads like wildfire, and it becomes a social media blast. You know, we have influencers that go, and then all of a sudden they post a picture of San Blas, and everybody wants to know where that is and how they go. So I do see the advantage of social media, and I know that we have direction of technology within the government that are trying to slowly steer into that direction, but I think it's one of those things where you have to make it part of the culture within the government and try to fight the status quo within what has been done with the government, within the government for 40 years, which is the proven thing that supposedly works, versus the new thing and what's efficient when it comes to trying to communicate what your message. I've had this argument with people that work for the tourism authority. You know, they're still with the mentality of some of them are in mentality of thinking, no, we need to spend $1 million on a TV ad that will run for 30 seconds. And I say, but that's really a waste of money. You can spend that and you have a multiplying effect, then you can reach so many more people than if you air it in the Super Bowl. It doesn't make sense, but that's what I'm saying. That's a challenge for the newer generation, I guess the relief coming in to try to change the culture within, to try to get it to work.
All right, well, we do need to conclude, unfortunately. We're a little bit over time. That was a fascinating session, so I really want to thank you on behalf of everyone for taking the time to come to NYU to be with us and to give us all a chance to get to know Panama and the many opportunities that are awaiting us in terms of tourism, investments, or just vacation. So we very much look forward to discovering Panama. And if everyone could please assist in expressing our sincere gratitude to the Honorable Mr. Alejandro Posse, the Consul General from Panama.